there was a big controversy with President Biden's statement that came out where he said, called all Trump supporters garbage. Now, in that moment, a transcript came out. That transcript all of a sudden had an apostrophe. And now we know there's almost a whistleblower situation happening between the White House stenographers, people you don't want to make mad, apparently, because they will go to the press and say, this is not what we stood for. There was no apostrophe. We are submitting it to the formal record that there was no apostrophe, that he called Trump supporters garbage. Rick, maybe this is the one time where the stenographers have a moment to really change the way people feel about this administration.
Look, I think we're at an unbelievable point where the career officials, civil servants of the federal government are pushing back on the overreach of the Joe Biden-Kamala Harris team. They have been able to get away with lying to the public for years. And I think that the stenographers, people who are career officials, have had enough of this administration and the manipulation that the media does. Now, what's remarkable is that we didn't get this strong of a pushback from the media. We got it from career officials. And that's, I think, a condemnation of the media. It shows just how much the media is not credible in covering Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
And part of that report was that they were being pressured, right? Well, they were being pressured to make this change. They said, well, we discussed it with President Biden, and he said that's not what he meant, so you guys need to change it.
The press office said they conferred with the president and that they got his meaning down, which just comes across as so Soviet, Rick, that they can't own the words. They could have actually probably made this story go away if they said something to the effect of, President Biden, in the heat of the moment, because he was so frustrated with the comedian's comments, said supporters when he and does not in any way want the American people to think he is casting a blanket net on all Americans. But instead, they tried to do this retroactive fix with grammar rules to try to make it seem as if your lying ears are betraying you. It just comes across as so Soviet.
Well, let's be honest. These stenographers have clearly been through this before. This is not their first time because they're so frustrated they're pushing back. The big question is, how many times did this happen before? How many times did the stenographers clean up mistakes from Joe Biden? This is really a scary moment because reporters at the White House are responsible for telling us in a transparent way exactly what's happening inside the White House, not playing politics, not playing for the Democrats, not cleaning up mistakes afterwards so that the public doesn't know what the mistakes are. And that's what we're seeing. Stenographers have had enough, and this is clearly not the first time. The big question is, what are the other instances where the Biden-Harris team has pressured employees to clean up their mistakes?
As we know, typically in any election year, the economy, employment, things of that nature really are at the front of people's minds. That is one of the biggest motivators to vote. And we had a new jobs number come out of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics for the amount of jobs added to the economy for the month of October. Now, you'll remember that this administration has already had some issues with reporting of jobs numbers where they've had to revise numbers down almost 800,000 in one jobs report that they over-reported had been added to the economy. So they're not too great at tracking this. But on Friday before the election, the new jobs numbers for October came out, and they were expecting to have added to the economy over 100,000 jobs, which would be a pretty good number. It's not a record-setting number, but that's a good number saying that the economy is stable. Instead, these numbers came out, Professor Hutchison, and they have added, the economy has added just 12,000 jobs. So almost 90% lower than they were expecting were added in the month of October. They're trying to spin it, but how much spin can control the damage that this economic number could do to the people that have not voted or are undecided voters in just 4 days?
Well, it's clearly a disastrous jobs report with only 12,000 jobs added. However, it's more likely than not that fewer jobs than 12,000 were added, given the record of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They've been very, very creative in their prior reports. So it's also important to take a step back and look at the numbers for September and the numbers for August. Guess what? They revised those numbers downward. So this is a pattern. This is a trend that comes from this administration, which believes in fictional numbers, it appears. So I think it's very important for the American people to understand that the economy is not performing very well under the Biden-Harris regime. Nonetheless, the Biden-Harris regime tells us that everything is wonderful.
We've talked on this show about real wages not have grown. The amount of take-home pay is not growing for Americans under the Biden administration. But this other statistic that they reported that 7.7% of workers hold part-time jobs for economic reasons. So when you take the unemployment rate, not adding jobs to the economy, but almost 7.7% of the workforce is saying they need part-time work in addition.
Yeah.
That really is the crux of it, because you can say we're adding jobs, but if people aren't making enough or able to afford things, that's the real number that's going to affect something like an election.
Well, I've seen it with friends here specifically. I've seen people, and look, some of them are voting for Harris, and you do want to go. What are you doing? And maybe we all have said, what are you doing? But they are, driving for Uber, or they're picking up groceries with Instacart. They're doing these things in addition to a full-time job just to support and pay for their family. The economy has changed everything. Like I've said before, over the last couple of years, I shouldn't be having to worry about, like, you take your kids to eat at a fast food restaurant. You shouldn't even really be, with what it is, I shouldn't be thinking about it. I shouldn't be thinking about what they're ordering at McDonald's. But then you get a bill, or, and you're like, what? How is this at all possible?
And McDonald's, they don't give you the bill at the end.
McDonald's pretty good. Yeah, I know what you mean. But they say, here's the number. Not even McDonald's. I mean, a lot of these places, the numbers are just rising and rising and rising. And when you look at that jobs growth, where they expect there to be six figures, and they only bring in 10,000 new jobs. I mean, imagine any other business, let's put it as a business point of view, any other business having their expectations, telling their stockholders, we're going to do this. When they miss the mark, when, Netflix misses the mark by 10%, chaos happens to their stock. Look at the American people. They missed the mark by 90+% at this point for the job growth. It's just a sad time too, because you don't want that to be the case, obviously, but it hopefully means it's time for a change.